More than 30,000 years ago, Thoth did not carve the Emerald Tablets to glorify power or to dazzle civilizations with secrets of alchemy. He carved them to preserve a warning that would survive collapse, endure silence, and wait patiently for humanity to rediscover humility. The Emerald Tablets were preserved because they carried truths too dangerous to be forgotten. Civilizations rise and fall, monuments crumble, voices vanish, but wisdom disguised in stone endures. Thoth understood that knowledge without humility becomes peril, and so he sealed fragments of wisdom in green stone, ensuring they would outlast empires. They were not meant to be read all at once. They were fragments scattered across time, disguised in myth, preserved in silence. Each tablet carried a piece of memory, a shard of warning, a fragment of truth. Together, they formed a transmission from a civilization that had already watched the world fall once before. The tablets were preserved not for kings or conquerors, but for humanity itself. They were meant to endure quietly, waiting for the moment when pride consumed itself and humility returned. They were not entertainment, not spectacle, not legend. They were memory disguised in myth, fragments of Atlantis carried into Egypt, preserved in temples, sealed in silence. Why the Emerald Tablets were preserved is simple. They carried the final message of Thoth, the eternal scribe. They were his gift to humanity, his protection against forgetting, his warning against pride. They were preserved because civilizations collapse when they forget humility, and wisdom survives only when sealed in silence. And so, the Emerald Tablets endure quietly, whispering across ages, reminding humanity that brilliance dazzles, but arrogance consumes. They were preserved not as treasure, but as warning, not as myth, but as memory, not as spectacle, but as silence. If you love mythology and history from all cultures and forbidden ancient stories, subscribe, because this channel reveals the secrets behind every myth. And let me know from where you're watching, whether it's from a quiet study, a noisy cafe, or under your blanket, pretending you're doing homework, but secretly enjoying forbidden history. Thoth did not carve the Emerald Tablets for kings who sought glory, nor for priests who loved spectacle, nor for conquerors who believed themselves eternal. He was speaking to humanity itself, not to one age, but to all ages. His words were meant to travel across collapse, to whisper through silence, to endure beyond pride. He spoke to those who would live in times of dazzling brilliance, when civilizations rose rapidly and believed themselves invincible. He spoke to those who would rediscover advanced knowledge, but forget wisdom. Those who would crown themselves eternal, yet stand unknowingly at the edge of collapse. His audience was not the powerful, but the patient, not the prideful, but the humble, not the rulers of empires, but the seekers of truth. Thoth's message was directed toward the future, toward us, toward humanity, standing at another great turning. He knew that civilizations repeat mistakes, that pride blinds, that arrogance consumes. He spoke across ages, ensuring that his warning would survive collapse, endure silence, and wait patiently for rediscovery. The Emerald Tablets were not letters to kings or instructions for armies. They were transmissions to humanity, preserved in stone, disguised in myth, waiting for the moment when pride consumed itself and humility returned. Thoth was speaking to those who would listen not to noise, but to silence, not to spectacle, but to wisdom, not to pride, but to humility. And so the tablets endure quietly, whispering across ages, reminding us that Thoth's audience was never rulers or conquerors, but humanity itself, waiting patiently for the moment when we would finally understand. The Emerald Tablets were not carved for the glory of Atlantis, nor for the splendor of Egypt, nor for the pride of any single civilization. They were written for the end of an age, for a time when humanity would rediscover advanced knowledge but forget the wisdom that must guide it. Thoth understood that knowledge dazzles, but wisdom endures. He knew that civilizations rise rapidly when they master science, geometry, and power, yet collapse just as quickly when they dismiss humility. The tablets were designed not to instruct the powerful in their prime, but to warn the future in its peril. They were fragments of memory, preserved in stone, waiting patiently for the moment when humanity would once again stand at the edge of collapse. This knowledge was not meant to entertain, nor to dazzle, nor to be consumed as spectacle. It was meant to remind humanity of balance, of law, of cosmic order. It was meant to whisper across ages that brilliance without humility collapses, wisdom without silence vanishes, and pride consumes itself. The tablets carried truths too dangerous to be forgotten, truths that could not be revealed too early, truths that would only be understood when humanity was ready. The end of an age is not destruction alone, but turning. It is the moment when pride consumes itself, when civilizations collapse, when humanity must rediscover humility. The Emerald Tablets were preserved for this moment, waiting quietly, whispering across ages, reminding humanity that wisdom survives only when preserved in silence. And so, the tablets endure, not as entertainment, but as warning, not as legend, but as memory, not as spectacle, but as silence. They were meant for the end of an age, for the moment when humanity would need them most. Civilizations do not collapse because they lack brilliance. They collapse because brilliance blinds them. The Emerald Tablets remind us that the downfall of ancient worlds was not caused by ignorance, but by arrogance. Atlantis mastered sciences that bent nature, geometries that mirrored the cosmos, and energies that blurred the line between spirit and matter. Egypt built monuments aligned with stars, temples echoing cosmic rhythms, and rituals that disguised fragments of wisdom. Yet both carried within them the seeds of collapse, pride, imbalance, and the dismissal of humility. The fall of ancient civilizations followed a pattern as steady as the tides. First came discovery, dazzling breakthroughs in knowledge, architecture, and power. Then came spectacle, monuments rising higher, armies marching farther, rulers crowning themselves eternal. Finally came arrogance, the belief that eternity belonged to them, that collapse was impossible, that silence was emptiness. And when humility was forgotten, collapse arrived swiftly. Towers drowned, temples crumbled, harbors vanished, and voices were silenced. The Emerald Tablets were preserved precisely because Thoth understood this rhythm. He knew that civilizations rise rapidly when they master knowledge, but collapse just as quickly when they forget wisdom. He watched Atlantis consume itself, saw Egypt disguise fragments of memory, and understood that humanity would repeat the same mistake again and again. The tablets were carved not to prevent collapse entirely, but to remind humanity why collapse happens. Pride blinds, arrogance consumes, imbalance destroys. Ancient civilizations fell because they mistook knowledge for permanence. They believed geometry made them eternal. Armies made them invincible. Monuments made them indestructible. Yet eternity does not belong to pride. Eternity belongs to balance, to humility, to silence. The tablets whisper this truth across ages, reminding us that brilliance dazzles, but arrogance consumes. And so, the fall of ancient civilizations is not mystery, but memory. It is the rhythm of rise and collapse, the cycle of pride and humility, the pattern Thoth preserved in stone. The Emerald Tablets endure quietly, waiting patiently, reminding humanity that civilizations do not collapse because they lack brilliance. They collapse because they forget humility. Thoth did not carve the Emerald Tablets to impress future generations with mystical riddles or to decorate temples with cryptic inscriptions. He carved them to preserve a pattern, a rhythm of history that repeats itself with unnerving precision. Civilizations rise, they dazzle, they consume themselves, and they collapse. This cycle is not random, nor is it unique to Atlantis or Egypt. It is the pattern of humanity itself, a rhythm that echoes across ages. The pattern begins with discovery. A people unlock knowledge, master sciences, build monuments, and crown themselves eternal. Their brilliance dazzles, their confidence grows, and their pride swells. Then comes spectacle. Towers rise higher, armies march farther, temples echo louder. Knowledge becomes entertainment, wisdom becomes noise, humility is dismissed as weakness. Finally comes arrogance. Civilizations believe collapse is impossible, eternity belongs to them, and silence is emptiness. At that moment, the pattern completes itself. Collapse arrives swiftly. Monuments crumble, voices vanish, and memory dissolves into myth. Thoth warned about this pattern because he had already seen it unfold. Atlantis was not destroyed by ignorance, but by arrogance. Its brilliance dazzled, but its pride consumed it. Egypt carried fragments of wisdom, but even Egypt disguised truths in ritual, preserving them in silence rather than risking spectacle. Thoth understood that humanity would repeat the same mistake again and again, each age rising rapidly, dazzling briefly, and collapsing just as fast. The Emerald Tablets were preserved to remind humanity of this rhythm. They whisper across ages that brilliance without humility collapses, wisdom without silence vanishes, and pride consumes itself. The pattern is not punishment, but law, not curse, but cycle, not myth, but memory. Civilizations collapse not because they lack knowledge, but because they forget balance. The warning carved in stone is simple. The pattern will repeat until humanity learns humility. Civilizations rise, they dazzle, they collapse. The tablets endure quietly, waiting patiently, reminding us that Thoth's warning was not about Atlantis alone, but about humanity itself. The pattern is the rhythm of history, and the Emerald Tablets are its preserved memory. Thoth's message in the Emerald Tablets was not simply about collapse or warning, it was about balance. He understood that civilizations rise and fall not because of chance, but because they either honor or ignore the laws of cosmic order. To him, balance was not a vague idea, but the very rhythm of existence. The stars moved in harmony, the seasons turned in cycles, the tides followed the moon, and the soul itself was bound to laws greater than pride. The Emerald Tablets remind us that law is not punishment, but rhythm. Cosmic order is not control, but harmony. Balance is not weakness, but endurance. Civilizations endure when they align themselves with these truths, when they recognize that power must be tempered by humility. Knowledge must be guided by wisdom, and silence must be honored as much as spectacle. When they forget, collapse follows swiftly. Thoth carved these truths into stone because he had already seen what happens when civilizations ignore them. Atlantis dazzled with brilliance, but it dismissed balance. Its rulers believed eternity belonged to them. Its scientists bent nature without humility. Its monuments rose without harmony. The result was collapse. Egypt carried fragments of wisdom, aligning pyramids with stars, temples with solstices, rituals with cosmic rhythms. Yet even Egypt disguised truths in myth, preserving them in silence rather than risking arrogance. Balance, law, and cosmic order were the foundation of Thoth's message. He wanted humanity to remember that the cosmos itself is cycle, rhythm, harmony. Civilizations are not eternal because they build monuments, but because they honor balance. Knowledge dazzles, but wisdom endures. Power consumes, but humility preserves. Silence is not emptiness, but protection. The Emerald Tablets endure quietly, whispering across ages, reminding humanity that balance is the law of endurance. Civilizations collapse when they forget it, but wisdom survives when preserved in silence. Thoth's message was not about power, but about harmony, not about spectacle, but about rhythm, not about eternity, but about balance. And so, the tablets remind us that cosmic order is not myth, but memory. It is the rhythm of existence, the law of endurance, the balance that sustains civilizations. Those who honor it endure. Those who forget it collapse. The Emerald Tablets remind us that knowledge alone is never enough. Civilizations do not collapse because they lack discovery. They collapse because discovery is not tempered by wisdom. Thoth understood this truth deeply, for he had already watched Atlantis dazzle with brilliance and then vanish beneath the waves. The danger was not ignorance, but arrogance, the belief that knowledge itself was permanence, that discovery itself was invincibility. Knowledge without wisdom becomes spectacle. It dazzles, it entertains, it crowns itself eternal. But wisdom is what guides knowledge, what tempers pride, what preserves balance. Atlantis mastered sciences that bent nature, geometries that mirrored the cosmos, and energies that blurred spirit and matter. Yet they consumed wisdom as entertainment, dismissed humility as weakness, and silenced the voice of balance. Their brilliance became their downfall, their discoveries became their destruction. Thoth carved the Emerald Tablets to remind humanity of this danger. He knew that knowledge dazzles, but wisdom endures. He understood that civilizations rise rapidly when they master discovery, but collapse just as quickly when they forget humility. Knowledge without wisdom becomes weapon. Power without balance becomes corruption. Brilliance without silence becomes noise. The tablets were preserved to whisper across ages that discovery alone is peril, and wisdom is the only safeguard. Egypt carried fragments of this truth, disguising wisdom in ritual, preserving it in geometry, sealing it in silence. The pyramids aligned with stars. Temples echoed cosmic rhythms. Rituals disguised fragments of balance. Yet even Egypt risked spectacle, and so Thoth ensured that the tablets would endure quietly, waiting patiently for rediscovery. The danger of knowledge without wisdom is not myth, but memory. It is the rhythm of collapse, the cycle of pride, the pattern of history. Civilizations rise, they dazzle, they consume themselves, they collapse. The Emerald Tablets endure quietly, reminding humanity that knowledge dazzles, but wisdom preserves. Discovery entertains, but humility endures. And so, the tablets whisper across ages. Knowledge without wisdom is peril. It dazzles briefly, but collapses swiftly. Wisdom is the safeguard, humility the foundation, silence the protection. Without them, civilizations consume themselves, and memory dissolves into myth. The Emerald Tablets remind us that power is never neutral. It dazzles, it tempts, and it consumes. Civilizations do not collapse because they lack strength. They collapse because strength blinds them. Thoth understood this truth, for he had already watched Atlantis rise to dazzling heights of authority and then vanish beneath the waves. The danger was not weakness, but excess, the belief that power itself was permanence, that authority itself was invincibility. Power always corrupts civilizations because it feeds pride. Rulers crown themselves eternal, armies march as if invincible, monuments rise as if indestructible. Authority becomes spectacle, strength becomes arrogance, and humility is dismissed as weakness. The more power a civilization gathers, the more it believes collapse is impossible. Yet eternity does not belong to pride. Eternity belongs to balance, to humility, to silence. Atlantis was the perfect example. Its rulers mastered sciences, bent nature, and crowned themselves eternal. They believed their brilliance made them invincible, their monuments indestructible, their authority permanent. Yet their power consumed itself. Pride blinded them. Arrogance corrupted them, imbalance destroyed them. Collapse arrived swiftly, drowning towers, silencing voices, erasing memory. Egypt carried fragments of wisdom, aligning monuments with stars, disguising truths in ritual, preserving balance in silence. Yet even Egypt risked spectacle. And so Thoth ensured that the Emerald Tablets would endure quietly, waiting patiently for rediscovery. The corruption of power is not myth, but memory. It is the rhythm of collapse, the cycle of pride, the pattern of history. Civilizations rise, they dazzle, they consume themselves, they collapse. The Emerald Tablets whisper across ages that power dazzles briefly, but humility endures. Authority entertains, but balance preserves. Strength consumes, but silence protects. Thoth carved this truth into stone because he knew humanity would repeat the same mistake again and again. Power would dazzle, pride would blind, arrogance would consume, collapse would follow. The tablets were preserved to remind humanity that power without humility corrupts, authority without balance destroys, strength without silence vanishes. And so, the tablets endure quietly, whispering across ages, reminding us that civilizations do not collapse because they lack power. They collapse because power blinds them, pride consumes them, and humility is forgotten. Atlantis is often spoken of as myth, a story told to entertain, a legend whispered in philosophy and folklore. Yet the Emerald Tablets remind us that Atlantis was not created to amuse, but to warn. Its collapse was not a fable, but a memory disguised in myth. Thoth preserved fragments of its wisdom because he understood that humanity would dismiss the truth as legend, yet still carry the warning unconsciously across ages. Atlantis dazzled with brilliance. Its towers rose with impossible geometry. Its harbors stretched across oceans. Its sciences bent nature itself. It was a civilization that believed eternity belonged to it. Yet brilliance without humility collapses, and Atlantis consumed itself. Pride blinded its rulers, arrogance corrupted its discoveries, imbalance destroyed its harmony. The flood that drowned its monuments was not accident, but consequence. The collapse was not punishment, but pattern. Thoth carried fragments of Atlantis into Egypt, disguising them in ritual, preserving them in geometry, sealing them in silence. The pyramids aligned with stars. Temples echoed cosmic rhythms. Symbols disguised fragments of memory. Egypt became the vessel of preservation, not to repeat Atlantis, but to guard against its mistakes. The Emerald Tablets were carved to remind humanity that Atlantis was not legend, but warning a civilization that dazzled briefly, collapsed swiftly, and left behind fragments of wisdom. The story of Atlantis endures because it is humanity's mirror. Civilizations rise rapidly, dazzle briefly, collapse just as fast. Pride blinds, arrogance consumes, imbalance destroys. Atlantis is not entertainment, but memory disguised as myth. It whispers across ages that brilliance dazzles, but humility endures. Knowledge entertains, but wisdom preserves. Power consumes, but silence protects. The Emerald Tablets remind us that Atlantis was preserved not as spectacle, but as warning. Its collapse was not myth, but memory, not legend, but law, not entertainment, but transmission. Thoth ensured that humanity would remember Atlantis, even if only as story, because its warning applies to every age. And so, Atlantis endures quietly, disguised in myth, preserved in silence, reminding humanity that civilizations collapse when they forget humility. It is not legend, but warning, a memory carved in stone, waiting patiently for rediscovery. The Emerald Tablets speak not only of warnings and cycles, but of a place, a chamber hidden beneath the sands, whispered about in myth and guarded in silence. This place is known as the Hall of Records. It was not designed as treasure vault or spectacle, but as a sanctuary of memory. Thoth understood that civilizations collapse. The Hall of Records became the vessel of preservation, the chamber where fragments of Atlantis were sealed in silence, waiting patiently for rediscovery. The Hall of Records was said to contain scrolls, tablets, and inscriptions that carried the memory of a world already lost. It was not meant to dazzle rulers or entertain priests, but to protect humanity against forgetting. Within its silence, fragments of geometry, astronomy, and cosmic law were preserved. The chamber was aligned with stars, disguised in myth, and hidden beneath stone, so that only those who sought wisdom with humility could rediscover it. The role of the Hall of Records was not to prevent collapse, but to ensure memory survived collapse. It was the safeguard against forgetting, the silent witness to humanity's repeated mistakes. When Atlantis drowned, fragments were carried into Egypt. When Egypt disguised wisdom in ritual, the Hall of Records preserved it in silence. It was the chamber of endurance, the sanctuary of memory, the vessel of truth. Thoth understood that humanity would dismiss wisdom as myth, disguise memory as legend, and consume knowledge as spectacle. The Hall of Records was his protection against this. It was the place where fragments of truth could endure quietly, waiting for the moment when humanity would rediscover humility. Its role was not entertainment, but preservation, not spectacle, but silence, not legend, but transmission. The Emerald Tablets remind us that the Hall of Records is not myth but memory. It is the chamber of endurance, the vessel of preservation, the sanctuary of wisdom. Its role is simple: to ensure that when civilizations collapse, fragments of truth survive. It waits quietly beneath the sands, whispering across ages, reminding humanity that wisdom endures only when preserved in silence. The Emerald Tablets were not concealed out of secrecy alone. They were hidden because their truths were too dangerous to be revealed openly, too powerful to be consumed casually, and too sacred to be turned into spectacle. Thoth understood that humanity, dazzled by knowledge and blinded by pride, would misuse wisdom if it were handed freely. He knew that civilizations rise rapidly when they master discovery, but collapse just as quickly when they forget humility. To protect humanity from itself, he disguised the message in myth, sealed it in stone, and scattered it across ages. The message was hidden because knowledge without wisdom becomes weapon. Atlantis proved this when its rulers bent nature, mastered energies, and crowned themselves eternal. Their discoveries dazzled, but their arrogance consumed them. Collapse followed swiftly, drowning towers, silencing voices, erasing memory. Thoth carried fragments of wisdom into Egypt, but even Egypt risked spectacle. Priests disguised truths in ritual. Temples echoed cosmic rhythms. Pyramids aligned with stars. Yet the full message was concealed, preserved only in silence, waiting patiently for rediscovery. The Emerald Tablets were hidden because humanity was not ready. They were not meant to be read all at once, nor consumed as entertainment. They were fragments, preserved quietly, waiting for the end of an age, the moment when pride consumed itself and humility returned. Thoth understood that wisdom must be preserved in silence, disguised in myth, protected against arrogance. The tablets were hidden not as punishment, but as protection. The concealment itself became part of the transmission. By hiding the message, Thoth ensured that only those who sought wisdom with humility would rediscover it. The tablets were not treasure for kings, nor spectacle for priests, nor entertainment for scholars. They were preserved for humanity itself, waiting for the moment when collapse reminded us of humility. And so, the Emerald Tablets endure quietly, hidden in stone and sand, disguised in myth and ritual. Their message was concealed not to deny humanity, but to protect it. They whisper across ages, reminding us that wisdom survives only when preserved in silence, and that some truths must be hidden until humanity is ready to understand. The Emerald Tablets remind us that civilizations do not simply appear and vanish by accident. Their rhythm follows a cycle as old as humanity itself: rise, dazzle, consume, collapse. Thoth carved this truth into stone because he had already witnessed it unfold in Atlantis, and he knew it would repeat again and again. The cycle is not myth, but memory. Not curse, but law. It is the rhythm of pride and humility, the pattern of brilliance and downfall. The cycle begins with discovery. A people unlock knowledge, master sciences, build monuments, and crown themselves eternal. Their brilliance dazzles, their confidence grows, and their pride swells. Then comes spectacle. Towers rise higher, armies march farther, temples echo louder. Knowledge becomes entertainment, wisdom becomes noise, humility is dismissed as weakness. Finally comes arrogance. Civilizations believe collapse is impossible. Eternity belongs to them, and silence is emptiness. At that moment, the cycle completes itself. Collapse arrives swiftly. Monuments crumble, voices vanish, and memory dissolves into myth. Atlantis was the clearest example. Its rulers mastered sciences that bent nature, geometries that mirrored the cosmos, and energies that blurred spirit and matter. Yet they consumed wisdom as spectacle, dismissed humility as weakness, and silenced balance. Their brilliance dazzled briefly, but their arrogance consumed them. Collapse followed swiftly, drowning towers, silencing voices, erasing memory. Egypt carried fragments of wisdom, aligning monuments with stars, disguising truths in ritual, preserving balance in silence. Yet even Egypt risked spectacle, and so Thoth ensured that the Emerald Tablets would endure quietly, waiting patiently for rediscovery. The cycle of rise and collapse is not punishment, but pattern. Civilizations rise when they honor balance, collapse when they forget humility. Knowledge dazzles, but wisdom endures. Power consumes, but silence preserves. Pride blinds, but humility protects. The Emerald Tablets were preserved to remind humanity of this rhythm, to whisper across ages that collapse is not accident, but consequence. And so, the tablets endure quietly, reminding us that civilizations rise rapidly, dazzle briefly, and collapse just as fast. The cycle is the rhythm of history, the law of balance, the memory of humanity. It repeats until humility is rediscovered and wisdom is preserved in silence. The Emerald Tablets remind us that humanity does not stumble into collapse by accident. It repeats the same mistake across ages, a rhythm so familiar that Thoth carved it into stone as warning. Civilizations rise rapidly, dazzle briefly, and collapse just as fast, not because they lack brilliance, but because they forget humility. The repeated mistake is pride, the belief that eternity belongs to them, that collapse is impossible, that silence is emptiness. Atlantis was the first great example. Its rulers mastered sciences that bent nature, geometries that mirrored the cosmos, and energies that blurred spirit and matter. They believed their discoveries made them invincible, their monuments indestructible, their brilliance eternal. Yet their pride consumed them, their arrogance blinded them, their imbalance destroyed them. Collapse followed swiftly, drowning towers, silencing voices, erasing memory. Egypt carried fragments of wisdom, aligning pyramids with stars, disguising truths in ritual, preserving balance in silence. Yet even Egypt risked spectacle, and so Thoth ensured that the Emerald Tablets would endure quietly, waiting patiently for rediscovery. Humanity's repeated mistake is mistaking knowledge for permanence. Civilizations crown themselves eternal because they master discovery, build monuments, and dazzle with brilliance. Yet knowledge without wisdom becomes weapon. Power without balance becomes corruption. Brilliance without humility becomes collapse. The cycle repeats endlessly. Rise, dazzle, consume, collapse. Each age believes itself invincible. Each age forgets humility. Each age collapses. Thoth feared this repetition more than collapse itself. He knew civilizations would rise and fall, but he feared humanity would forget the warning. He carved the Emerald Tablets to preserve memory, to ensure that even when pride consumed itself, fragments of wisdom would endure. The tablets whisper across ages that humanity's repeated mistake is pride, arrogance, imbalance. Collapse is not accident, but consequence. And so, the Emerald Tablets endure quietly, reminding us that humanity repeats the same mistake again and again. Civilizations rise rapidly, dazzle briefly, collapse just as fast. Pride blinds, arrogance consumes, imbalance destroys. The tablets whisper across ages that wisdom survives only when preserved in silence, and humility is the safeguard against collapse. The Emerald Tablets remind us that collapse does not begin with monuments crumbling or armies failing. It begins within. Civilizations fall first in the soul, long before they fall in stone. Thoth understood that humanity's greatest danger was not the loss of external knowledge, but the loss of inner knowledge, the wisdom of balance, humility, and silence. When civilizations forget the inner voice, they consume themselves from within. Inner knowledge is the wisdom that guides discovery, the humility that tempers pride, the silence that protects truth. It is the recognition that knowledge dazzles but does not preserve, that power consumes but does not endure, that brilliance entertains but does not protect. Atlantis mastered sciences that bent nature, geometries that mirrored the cosmos, and energies that blurred spirit and matter. Yet it dismissed inner knowledge as weakness. Its rulers silenced humility, consumed wisdom as spectacle, and crowned themselves eternal. Collapse followed swiftly, drowning towers, silencing voices, erasing memory. Egypt carried fragments of inner knowledge, disguising them in ritual, preserving them in geometry, sealing them in silence. The pyramids aligned with stars, temples echoed cosmic rhythms, rituals disguised fragments of balance. Yet even Egypt risked spectacle, and so Thoth ensured that the Emerald Tablets would endure quietly, waiting patiently for rediscovery. The loss of inner knowledge is humanity's repeated mistake. Civilizations rise rapidly when they master discovery, but collapse just as quickly when they forget humility. Knowledge without inner wisdom becomes weapon. Power without balance becomes corruption. Brilliance without silence becomes noise. The Emerald Tablets whisper across ages that collapse begins not in stone, but in soul. Thoth carved this truth into stone because he knew humanity would forget. He understood that civilizations would rise and fall, but feared humanity would dismiss the inner voice. The tablets were preserved to remind us that wisdom survives only when preserved in silence, and that inner knowledge is the safeguard against collapse. And so, the Emerald Tablets endure quietly, whispering across ages, reminding humanity that civilizations collapse not because they lack brilliance, but because they lose inner knowledge. The soul forgets humility, the heart dismisses silence, and wisdom dissolves into myth. Thoth did not carve the Emerald Tablets simply to preserve wisdom. He carved them because he feared something greater than collapse itself. Civilizations rise and fall. That rhythm is inevitable. What Thoth feared most was that humanity would forget the lesson hidden within collapse, that pride would blind us so completely that even memory would dissolve into myth. He feared not destruction, but forgetting. Atlantis was proof of this danger. Its towers rose with impossible geometry. Its sciences bent nature. Its rulers crowned themselves eternal. Yet when collapse came, it was not only monuments that drowned, it was memory. Voices vanished, wisdom dissolved, and arrogance consumed itself. Egypt carried fragments of truth, aligning pyramids with stars, disguising wisdom in ritual, preserving balance in silence. But even Egypt risked spectacle. And so Thoth ensured that the Emerald Tablets would endure quietly, waiting patiently for rediscovery. What Thoth feared most was not the loss of knowledge, but the loss of humility. He understood that civilizations could rediscover sciences, rebuild monuments, and master discoveries. But if they forgot humility, they would repeat the same mistake again and again. Knowledge dazzles, but wisdom endures. Power consumes, but silence preserves. Pride blinds, but humility protects. Without humility, collapse is inevitable. He feared that humanity would crown noise as truth, dismiss silence as emptiness, and consume wisdom as entertainment. He feared that arrogance would blind us so deeply that even warnings carved in stone would be ignored. The Emerald Tablets were his safeguard against this. By sealing wisdom in silence, disguising it in myth, and preserving it in stone, he ensured that fragments of truth would survive, even when pride consumed itself. The greatest fear Thoth carried was that humanity would forget the rhythm of collapse, dismiss the law of balance, and lose the inner voice of humility. The Emerald Tablets whisper across ages that collapse is not accident, but consequence, not curse, but cycle, not myth, but memory. And so, the tablets endure quietly, reminding us of what Thoth feared most, not destruction, but forgetting. Civilizations collapse when they lose humility, but wisdom survives when preserved in silence. His fear became his gift, a warning carved in stone, waiting patiently for us to finally understand. The Emerald Tablets were not carved to entertain, nor to dazzle, nor to be consumed as spectacle. They were preserved to deliver one final instruction to humanity, a message meant for the end of an age. When pride consumes itself, when civilizations collapse, and when humanity must rediscover humility. Thoth understood that knowledge dazzles, but wisdom endures, that power consumes, but silence preserves, that pride blinds, but humility protects. His final instruction was simple, yet eternal. Remember balance, honor humility, preserve wisdom in silence. The final instruction is not a command, but a reminder. Civilizations rise rapidly when they master discovery, but collapse just as quickly when they forget humility. Knowledge without wisdom becomes weapon. Power without balance becomes corruption. Brilliance without silence becomes noise. The tablets whisper across ages that collapse is not accident, but consequence. Not curse, but cycle. Not myth, but memory. Humanity's safeguard is humility. Its endurance is balance. Its protection is silence. Thoth carved this instruction into stone because he feared humanity would forget. He understood that civilizations would rise and fall, but he feared that pride would blind us so deeply that even memory would dissolve into myth. The Emerald Tablets were preserved to ensure that fragments of wisdom would survive, collapse, endure silence, and wait patiently for rediscovery. The final instruction was not meant for kings or priests, but for humanity itself, for us, standing at the edge of another great turning. The instruction is clear: do not mistake knowledge for eternity. Do not crown pride as truth. Do not dismiss silence as emptiness. Honor balance, preserve humility, protect wisdom in silence. Civilizations collapse when they forget this, but humanity endures when it remembers. And so, the Emerald Tablets whisper across ages, delivering their final instruction to humanity. Wisdom survives only when preserved in silence. Balance is the law of endurance. Humility is the safeguard against collapse. This is the truth carved in stone, the memory disguised in myth, the transmission waiting patiently for rediscovery. The final instruction is not spectacle, but silence, not legend, but law, not entertainment, but endurance. The Emerald Tablets remind us that wisdom does not endure because it is shouted, but because it is preserved in silence. Thoth understood that civilizations collapse, monuments crumble, voices vanish, but truth must survive. The message carved into stone was not designed to dazzle rulers or entertain priests. It was designed to endure collapse, to survive arrogance, to whisper across ages until humanity was ready to listen. This message survived time because it was hidden, disguised, and sealed. Atlantis drowned, but fragments of its wisdom were carried into Egypt. Egypt risked spectacle, but preserved fragments in ritual, geometry, and silence. The Emerald Tablets were carved not to be consumed immediately, but to wait patiently for rediscovery. Their survival was not accident, but design. Thoth ensured that wisdom would be disguised in myth, protected in silence, and preserved in stone, so that even when pride consumed itself, fragments of truth would remain. The message survived because it was not entrusted to rulers or armies, but to silence itself. Noise collapses, spectacle vanishes, arrogance consumes itself, but silence endures. The tablets were hidden beneath sands, disguised in legend, preserved in geometry. They survived because they were not entertainment, but transmission, not spectacle, but memory, not myth, but law. Thoth feared that humanity would forget, that pride would blind us so deeply that even collapse would not teach humility. To protect against this, he carved the message into stone, ensuring that fragments of wisdom would survive time itself. The Emerald Tablets whisper across ages that collapse is not accident, but consequence, not curse, but cycle, not myth, but memory. Their survival is proof that wisdom endures when preserved in silence. The reason this message survived time is simple. It was meant to. It was carved not for kings or priests, but for humanity itself. It was preserved not for spectacle, but for rediscovery. It was hidden not to deny us, but to protect us. The Emerald Tablets endure quietly, waiting patiently, reminding humanity that wisdom survives, endures arrogance, and whispers across ages until we are ready to understand. The Emerald Tablets were not carved for the glory of Atlantis, nor for the splendor of Egypt, nor for the pride of any single civilization. They were preserved for a future moment, a turning point in humanity's story. Thoth understood that wisdom cannot be forced upon a people who are not ready. Knowledge dazzles, but wisdom requires humility. His message was meant to return only when humanity stood at the edge of collapse, when pride consumed itself, and when silence was finally valued again. This knowledge was not meant for the rulers of empires or the priests of temples. It was meant for humanity itself, for those who would live in an age of dazzling brilliance, yet deep imbalance. Thoth foresaw a time when humanity would rediscover advanced sciences, master energies, and crown itself eternal once more. He knew that this rediscovery would come with danger, the temptation to consume wisdom as spectacle, to dismiss humility as weakness, to silence balance in favor of pride. The tablets were preserved to return at that moment, to remind humanity of the law of collapse and the rhythm of balance. The timing of this return was deliberate. The Emerald Tablets were hidden in silence, disguised in myth, and preserved in stone, so that they would not be consumed too early. If revealed before humanity was ready, they would have been dismissed as entertainment or corrupted by arrogance. Only at the end of an age, when collapse reminded us of humility, would their message be understood. Their return was meant to be rediscovery, not spectacle, remembrance, not entertainment, transmission, not noise. Thoth's vision was clear. The tablets would survive time, endure collapse, and whisper across ages until humanity reached the moment of rediscovery. That moment is not defined by calendar or clock, but by condition. It arrives when pride blinds us, when arrogance consumes us, when collapse forces humility to return. The Emerald Tablets were meant to reappear then, as reminder, as safeguard, as preserved wisdom. And so, the tablets endure quietly, waiting patiently for the moment when humanity is ready. Their knowledge was meant to return not in spectacle, but in silence, not in pride, but in humility, not in legend, but in law. They whisper across ages, reminding us that wisdom returns only when humanity is ready to listen. The Emerald Tablets remind us that the ancients did not preserve wisdom for spectacle, nor carve truths into stone for entertainment. They wanted us to remember something far deeper, that civilizations rise and fall, but the soul of humanity endures only when guided by humility, balance, and silence. Their monuments were not built to dazzle alone. They were aligned with stars, echoing cosmic rhythms, whispering across ages that humanity is part of a greater order. What the ancients wanted us to remember was simple. Knowledge dazzles, but wisdom preserves. Power consumes, but humility protects. Pride blinds, but silence endures. Atlantis dazzled with brilliance, yet collapsed swiftly because it forgot humility. Egypt carried fragments of wisdom, disguising them in ritual, geometry, and myth, ensuring that even when pride consumed itself, fragments of truth would survive. The ancients knew that humanity would repeat the same mistake again and again, and so they preserved memory in stone, waiting patiently for rediscovery. They wanted us to remember that collapse is not accident, but consequence. Civilizations fall not because they lack brilliance, but because they forget balance. The ancients carved monuments aligned with stars to remind us of cosmic order. They disguised wisdom in myth to protect it from arrogance. They sealed truths in silence so that only those who sought with humility would rediscover them. Their message was not about eternity through monuments, but eternity through balance. The ancients wanted us to remember that humanity is part of a greater rhythm. The stars move in harmony, the tides follow the moon, the seasons turn in cycles. Civilizations endure only when they honor this rhythm. When they forget, collapse follows swiftly. The Emerald Tablets whisper across ages that wisdom survives only when preserved in silence, and that balance is the law of endurance. And so, the ancients preserved their message, not for kings or priests, but for humanity itself. They wanted us to remember that civilizations rise rapidly, dazzle briefly, and collapse just as fast. But wisdom endures when sealed in silence. Humility protects against pride, and balance sustains eternity. This is the truth they carved in stone, the memory they disguised in myth, the transmission they entrusted to time. The Emerald Tablets were not carved for the past alone. They were preserved because their warning still applies today. Civilizations rise rapidly when they master discovery, but collapse just as quickly when they forget humility. Thoth understood that humanity would rediscover advanced sciences, master energies, and crown itself eternal once more. He foresaw an age of dazzling brilliance, where towers would rise higher than ever, where knowledge would be consumed as spectacle, and where pride would blind humanity to balance. That age is ours. The warning is simple. Knowledge dazzles, but wisdom preserves. Power consumes, but humility protects. Pride blinds, but silence endures. The Emerald Tablets whisper across ages that collapse is not accident, but consequence. Civilizations fall not because they lack brilliance, but because they forget balance. The warning applies today because humanity stands once again at the edge of collapse, dazzled by discovery, blinded by pride, tempted to dismiss humility as weakness. Atlantis believed itself eternal, yet drowned swiftly. Egypt carried fragments of wisdom, disguising them in ritual, preserving them in silence. Humanity today risks repeating the same mistake, mistaking knowledge for permanence, consuming wisdom as entertainment, dismissing silence as emptiness. The Emerald Tablets endure quietly, reminding us that balance is the law of endurance. Humility is the safeguard against collapse, and silence is the protection of wisdom. The warning that still applies today is not about fear, but about remembrance. It is the reminder that civilizations rise rapidly, dazzle briefly, and collapse just as fast. It is the whisper that wisdom survives only when preserved in silence, that humility protects against pride, that balance sustains eternity. The Emerald Tablets were carved not for kings or priests, but for humanity itself, for us standing at the edge of another great turning. And so the tablets whisper across ages, reminding us that the warning still applies today. Knowledge dazzles, but wisdom endures. Power consumes, but silence preserves. Pride blinds, but humility protects. This is the truth carved in stone, the memory disguised in myth, the transmission waiting patiently for rediscovery. Now, as the night deepens and the story settles into silence, let the rhythm of these words drift into rest. The warning endures, but wisdom waits quietly, like a gentle whisper in the dark. Close your eyes, remember balance, and let silence preserve you. Good night.